The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's webinar, Promoting Undergraduate Research in Communication Sciences and Disorders. My name is Froma Ross, and I will serve as the facilitator for today's session. This webinar is hosted by ASHA's Academic Affairs and Research Education Unit, which has been working on one of ASHA's chief strategic initiatives, which is to improve the science base in our discipline. As part of this critical mission, ASHA is developing resources to promote undergraduate student research engagement to increase their exposure to evidence-based research and also to stimulate their interest in pursuing research careers in CSD. Today, we are indeed fortunate to have two presenters with considerable experience and interest in undergraduate research. Jen Friberg from Illinois State University and John Folkins from Bowling Green State University. Both Jen and John serve as elected officers of the SIG-10 Coordinating Committee, which is, SIG-10 is Issues in Higher Education. Two additional notes before we begin. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ASHA website. Please check your email for announcements of when and where it will be posted. And finally, please hold your questions until the end of the session. We did reserve a dedicated time period for questions and answers, but feel free to type them as you think of them throughout the session. And thank you for joining us.
Hi there. My name is Jen Friberg. I'm one of the panelists today for this webinar, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of background as to my interest in undergraduate research. I am currently an associate professor at Illinois State University, and I serve as the SIG-10 coordinator for SIG-10, as Froma mentioned. I've been engaged in a variety of formats on small and large scale with undergraduate research for the last 5 to 6 years. Just in the last year, I've had 42, if I counted correctly, students who are undergraduates involved in different research activities with me. This is an area that I think is very, very important and I'm quite passionate about.
Good. This is John Folkins. Welcome, everyone. And my first real efforts in supporting undergraduate research are back in 1978, where I developed a course, and we're going to talk about courses related to fostering undergraduate research later, but I developed a course, and I taught it for 17 years that got students started in undergraduate research. Then I became a central administrator, and I was at the University of Iowa as Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education for 7 years. And the honors program reported to me, and I spent a lot of time and effort across many different disciplines trying to foster individualized, independent research projects for undergraduate students. And I'll talk a little bit later about how those are great, but perhaps not the ideal way to do undergraduate research. And then I spent 7 years as provost here at Bowling Green State University, where we developed the Center for Undergraduate Research, and we pushed a variety of much more innovative models for getting students involved with undergraduate research. So that's my background. It's back to you, Jen, and I think we need to advance the slides.
Absolutely. Let's see. All right, and I believe that it's good for us to tell you all that we have no financial conflicts of interest to disclose to you at this time. All right, so the purpose today of this webinar is to share the benefits of exploring undergraduate students to research. There's a lot of background that will support this sort of practice as a pedagogical strategy for us as course instructors and faculty members. John and I also hope to share pros and cons of different approaches to undertaking an undergraduate research program, and we'll do so in light of our own experiences with undergraduate student researchers. We hope to give you lots of examples of what we've done in our own research labs to maybe help start the wheels turning as to how you can involve more undergraduates in your own programs in research activities. We have 3 specific learning outcomes for today. And here they are. We're hoping to describe and provide examples which will give you the why and the how for undergraduate research, why we do it and how we can do it. Specifically, we're hoping that each of you at the close of this webinar will be able to describe reasons and available evidence supporting the importance of research experiences for undergraduates. We hope that you'll be able to have access to examples and methods which could be used to infuse research into the undergraduate experience at your own college and university. And we hope to provide ways to help you implement undergraduate research experiences into your own individual CSD programs. Slide. All right, so what we'd like to talk about first is the importance of undergraduate research and give you the rationale and evidence that would support the use of undergraduate research experiences as part of an undergraduate curriculum in communication sciences and disorders. To begin, John is going to tell you a little bit about Donald Schoen and his work on reflective practitioners.
Back in 1981, Donald Schoen developed I think what I consider a very innovative approach to designing curricula called the reflective practitioner. He also did another book in 1990 that explained exactly how you go about it. It differs from what he referred to as technical rationality. Basically, that's the traditional approach where theory precedes practice. And in much of communication sciences and disorders, we have speech language hearing theory first, and then we have the theory of the disorders, and then the theory of how you do clinic and research are all the way tucked into the back of the very end of the curriculum. And Schoen it demonstrates how students don't remember things very well when they don't make decisions related to them and see how the theory relates to their practice. And so he really pushes a reflective practitioner model, and both clinic as well as undergraduate research are a great example of the reflective practice model, where when students are making decisions on their own and seeing how decisions are made, and then having to seek out the theory behind those decisions, they are much they learn things on a much higher level, a much more insightful level. So Jen, back to you with Ernie Boyer.
Sure. All right. So Ernest Boyer is the gentleman who coined the term scholarship of teaching and learning. Incidentally, also an audiologist, so we can claim him as a member of our CSD family. But he advocated strongly for something that he called research-based learning as a standard for undergraduate education. Essentially, Boyer was a huge proponent of studying what we do with teaching and learning to ensure that we're using best practices as instructors. So much in the same vein as we use evidence-based practice as clinicians, he advocated for evidence-based educational practices for us as course instructors. But essentially, he really wanted to know that he sought, to find out if undergraduate education was something that was effective in helping students learn, hold on to material longer, be more engaged in the learning process, and really found through a review of different research that had been done that this in fact was the case. And so he started advocating for this research-based learning for undergraduates. And we know that as students do benefit in a multitude of ways from this sort of experience, this is a good standard to aspire to. Now, there are a variety of different stakeholders that we can talk about in terms of who can benefit from the undergraduate research experience. And we're going to talk about each of these separately but briefly here for the next few minutes. John and I know full well that you're most interested, most likely, in ideas on how to get undergraduate research programs started, so we do want to save the bulk of our presentation for that, but we do feel that it's important to tell you why and how we know that undergraduate research can be effective for students, for faculty, for individual institutions, and for our discipline as a whole. We're going to start with students. We know that undergraduate research experiences can lead to deep rather than surface learning for course content, particularly when course content is reflected in the research experience. So if you can tie research to courses, students benefit tremendously. We know that undergraduate research leads to better retention of course content, and we know that it leads to higher levels of academic achievement. And in terms of developing research expertise, undergraduates who have research-based experiences develop data collection and analysis skills that their peers who don't engage in such research experiences lack. And we know that undergraduates are able to form strong, lasting mentor-type relationships with the faculty that they work with. And we know that those mentor relationships can help drive increased involvement in research activities during undergraduate and then graduate experiences.
In addition to that, let me just interject that, and we're going to get to this somewhat later, but often there's somewhat of the fear of the unknown related to research from students, and there's just a little bit of intimidation about, well, could I really do research? And undergraduate research helps quite a bit in that, as well as just kind of building their overall self-confidence.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. In terms of faculty, there are faculty benefits as well, including increased support for a research agenda, more folks helping in a lab to accomplish data collection, data analysis for various faculty projects, a personal satisfaction derived from encouraging professional growth in students. I'd call these aha moments where course content is operationalized in new and different ways, and you can see that emerge in students. I personally think that's really exciting. I love when students have those aha moments and say, oh gosh, we just found this, but we learned about it in class too, and they're able to put things together. And overall, because of these two things, we know that faculty who promote and engage in undergraduate research report a better quality of life within their academic setting, more satisfaction overall with the job that they're able to do and engage in doing on a daily basis. In terms of institutional benefits, these are fairly straightforward and focus on positive outcomes as a basis for increasing the stature of individual departments or colleges or an institution at large, and really focus on ways to bring in new students, maintain good faculty, and benefit the institution as a whole. Really, those institutions that engage in undergraduate research or promote and support undergraduate research find that they have broader opportunities for faculty and students, which is a definite benefit. In terms of the discipline, speaking specifically to CSD right now, we know that undergraduate researchers are more likely to consider careers in research and academia, even if that was not a career goal prior to their research experience. We know this is an area of concern in our fields of speech-language pathology and audiology. So involving undergraduates in research can help with our disciplinary PhD shortage and can support initiatives already in place by ASHA and CAPCIT and others to fill openings in academic positions. We also know that increases in undergraduate research productivity can create evidence that supports various clinical practices. And this is a huge need in our field to broaden what we know about what works in different clinical settings to maintain high levels of clinical competence for all of our program graduates.
Yeah, I would just interject that, evidence-based practice is really, I think, set up to be better understood by the students who have had experience in developing some of that evidence.
And I would agree, for sure. Let's see here. There we go. All right, in terms of practical considerations, John and I would like to divide this talking about what students need to consider and then what faculty need to consider in the establishment of undergraduate research programs. I'll speak first about the students and then hand it off to John, and he'll talk more about faculty. Really, as you look over the next few slides, as we put them up for you to look at, you'll see that the largest considerations for students and faculty come down to educating stakeholders. Students need to be informed of opportunities to engage in research, and they need to understand why these experiences are important. As John alluded to, there are a lot of students who really sort of have an apprehension about undergraduate research, in large part because it's a big unknown for them. They are not sure what to expect, and sometimes it can be something that is not quote-unquote worth the trouble to them. We would argue that by educating students well about what opportunities exist, how they work, how they can benefit from them, we can minimize such misconceptions about research and increase the number of students who pursue various research experiences. Building student interest takes planning by us as faculty, and so that's a really important consideration. How can you take students who don't know much about research, and how can we show them the benefits that can be gained by involving themselves in such experiences? And so we would argue that faculty really need to find ways to expose students to a variety of research types. Now, John will talk more in depth about the different research types that maybe are the best matches for undergraduate researchers in the next section of this webinar, so I won't go into too much detail, but it is our job to give students that exposure. It's our job to craft experiences and projects that are perceived as doable. We don't want to put students in a situation where they're set up to fail. So how can we, in one semester or in a couple of semesters, give an experience that's valuable and supports learning academically, clinically, in a research-based way? We need to plan for the needs of the busy CSD student. I can only speak about the students from my own program, but they tend to be high-achieving students who are Renaissance men and women, involved in many things, in many parts of our universities and communities. And so we find as faculty in my program that we need to figure out a way to show students how to integrate research into their busy lives and show how it can be done. A lot of times, they don't recognize how busy we are as faculty, and sharing with them how we're able to get things accomplished with our research agendas can help them envision a similar kind of situation for themselves. As faculty, we also need to work with our department advisors, our other faculty, to figure out how to provide big and small projects. How can we give students an overview of research, maybe in one semester, but a long-term project that they can really get sunk into over the course of several semesters? What opportunities exist in a particular department, and how can those be shared?
One of the other things to think about related to student interest is, to me, part of the excitement of research is the thrill of the hunt, that you don't really know where the research is going to lead you, and it's part of the ongoing challenge and excitement of research. Often we don't do enough of that in our undergraduate curriculum. Students think that science is full of right answers, and that when you're going to do a research project, it's just like a lab exercise where there's one correct answer and you made a calculation mistake or something if you didn't get the one right answer. So trying to get over that misperception about research, I think, will lend itself to greatly adding to student interest.
Absolutely. All right, well, John is going to talk more about faculty considerations.
Okay, and now have I got the, yeah, well, I'm not sure whether I've got the cursor yet or not. hopefully I'll get it soon. But really, one of the very biggest challenge is getting the faculty on board, so the faculty understand what are the benefits for them, and also, do they really know what the options are? And they don't look at it as saying they're going to have to entirely build their own undergraduate research program on their own initiative, inventing the whole thing from the ground up, as opposed to building on and joining a momentum of a program that is already in place. Also, it's part of the faculty desire to understand the values that can accrue to them, as well as others, from mentoring undergraduate research. And probably the biggest issue in terms of a consideration is getting beyond the idea that undergraduate research is going to take more of your time. If you do it right, it takes less of your time. I think all of us feel like we don't have the time and resources to get everything done, and undergraduate research can truly provide extra people, extra perspectives, extra resources that will help you build your scholarship program. And then we have to make sure that we build that into the faculty reward systems, and that faculty reward systems explicitly recognize that, so that people understand that their efforts in undergraduate research will be valued. So I don't think I am, oh, that worked. No, that went the wrong way.
There you go.
Okay, practical considerations. Selecting appropriate experiences, matching projects to student skills. Students only have so much time. They have limited ability as they get started in various types of things. And then there are just many other types of constraints on the kinds of projects that are appropriate for students. And one of the real issues is finding the projects for the students in a way that also brings them on board and builds some ownership on their part in terms of the projects. Okay? And even those of us who are the most productive and have lots of ideas and in a very active research program, it just can sometimes be a real strain to develop enough projects that are appropriate for undergraduate students. Okay? And then one of the things that's going to be really a practical consideration here is that can be greatly aided by a course for undergraduate research, but you've got to do it in a sustainable way and get it in the curriculum and get it understood and get it into people's teaching loads. If you do it as an extra, it's not going to sustain itself. Okay. And then also finding resources of major practical consideration. Supplies, availability of subjects, travel issues. Generally, you really have to keep in mind how to do things in a practical way. So you have to build on what is already there, coordinating with existing resources. Doing it on the cheap often is more reasonable and realistic than you thought. And although the resources out there to help students are often minimal, sometimes they are just barely adequate. So we'll talk about some of those things as we move into the different models for doing faculty research. Jen, do you have anything to add?
No, that summed it up nicely.
There we go. So now the next opportunities for undergraduate research, next big division. And here's the components of undergraduate research. And there are many different components here. Okay? And this is probably one of the biggest take-home issues that is why I put it first in terms of this section. Okay? In research, you've got the literature search, the research, designing the study, how you're going to really go about asking the question, and building the prospectus is a piece of that. Implementation of the research protocol, data analysis, analyzing the data, the input, the statistical analysis. Also, there's the interpretation that can be added to the slide, and the disseminations of the results. The point being that any one of these components or any combination of these components can make up a great undergraduate research experience. You don't have to do the whole list. Any combination often can be very, very positive for the students.
And I would just add there that some of these things could be built into a course. Some of them could be built into an independent study. If you look at what John said, that each of those components can stand separately as a research experience, well then you're really only limited by your own lack of creativity in terms of how you can fit those into what you're already doing.
And often you just, what you get good at doing is matching students to things on that list. You got a student, what are they interested in, and you just assign them one little of these pieces. And even if they blow it and it's not useful to you in the long run, at least they've learned something, and you might indirectly learn about how you might go about doing that if, in fact, what they were able to do wasn't that useful. Here's a slide here that summarizes a lot of where we're going to be going now. Approaches to undergraduate research. We're going to talk about individual complete projects, replicating studies, research teams, and having students mentor each other, and then individual research courses. Individual complete projects. This is the traditional approach. You take one small yet complete project. Your student, often your very talented student, is the one that would take that on. And basically, although I spent years and years and years advocating it and have directed many students in doing these types of projects, at this point I feel there are just a whole lot of disadvantages of doing it this way. And although it works for some students, it works wonderfully for many students, we shouldn't think of it as the only approach. You know, especially for your top students, you've got time pressures at the end of the senior year. They've got to graduate because they're planning on graduating with honors and all the other things that are going on in their life. And having to finish this just at that right time puts lots of extra pressure on students. They also, if you've got to do the whole project, you end up needing many, many different talents. And from disparate areas. Getting started and finding the project at the right time is also one of the talents that we kind of take for granted. And then the lack of structure and deadlines makes it many difficult. Realize that through their undergraduate programs, many of these students have really only done small projects at best. They'll do 3 or 4 papers for a course, but these big, long, involved projects where they structure the progress and set the deadlines for themselves is not something that many of these students have had experience doing it. And so we have to teach them that at the same time. The big issue here is individual complete projects are the traditional way of doing it. If you look at the Council on Undergraduate Research, that's really all they think about. And it's great. It leads to publications very often, which are good, but it's not the only way to go, and it doesn't scale up easily to large numbers of students. And it's not necessarily that this is the only approach one would take. Jen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say my experience with these kinds of projects is sometimes they're necessary, and sometimes we have to engage in those with students even when they aren't the best option. You know, there are honors projects, there are certain capstone sorts of experiences that students need to engage in, and for those students, absolutely, an individual complete project is the way to go for them. It's what they need in order to move forward in their program of study. And otherwise, I have to agree that what John said is largely true. The students that I've had the most success with in terms of completing an entire individual project as an undergraduate are the students who have a passion about a particular area. Most of you probably are familiar with the student who comes into your office and wants to, help in some way in your lab or with your research, and you say, well, what are you interested in? And their answer is, I'm not sure. And for those students, it's probably not appropriate to give them an entire project to complete because they may need half of a semester to figure out what they're really interested in doing. And so some of the other approaches that we'll talk about perhaps would work better. Just to give you an example of a student that I'm working with right now as an undergraduate, she came to me at the beginning of the fall semester last year and she said, Dr. Friberg, I am passionate about autism, but I'm passionate about autism in the global society, and I want to research what the differences are in diagnostic practices in various countries, and I want to do this through interviewing practitioners, and can you help me with how I would collect that data? And I almost fell off my chair and cried, because that was really truly one of the most forward-thinking students in terms of an undergraduate prepared to take on this kind of project. Generally, you know, I would agree with John that sometimes pieces of larger projects are more appropriate for these students in terms of what's feasible, what they're able to handle, and what their interest level is. But every once in a while, those students come to you and they're passionate, and absolutely they're appropriate for this kind of experience.
I would agree with that, and a lot of making undergraduate research work is reading the students, being able to set them up with what matches them. So you get your superstar students in, you kind of just want to get out of the way, and they'll find the resources they need. You have to be very careful, though, in terms of letting students take on projects in areas that are not within the mainstream interests of their mentor, whether it's you or another faculty member in your program. There can just be all kinds of complications there. Complications in terms of the student being able to finish, complications in terms of extra work or effort on the part of the faculty. So yes, absolutely, in some cases it's wonderful, but be careful. Okay? Okay. I don't know why I'm not going to the, there he goes. Okay, replicating existing research studies. Okay, that is, you take a study that somebody else has done and publish, and you give it to a student and say, how would you do this study? And you can do it a couple of ways. One, you can give them the rationale and they figure out how to do it. Or you could give them the whole paper that somebody else has written and say either do it exactly this way, or a variation on that is you do it your way, and maybe even do it a different way. Or there's many variations on the replicating of research studies. A major advantage is that it overcomes the problem of finding questions to study. And very often students, especially in the individual projects, half of the time involved in that project was finding the question to ask. So if you already have a question or two that you're having students in semester after semester trying to look at, it can significantly help them in terms of that aspect of it. And maybe that's not the best learning outcome, finding your own project, that the students are ready for at this time. It may be they'll get much better at finding their own projects later as they get more research experience. Another aspect, procedures can be standardized. That is, there are efficiencies of scale. And after you do things over and over again, you learn approaches to how to do it, and you can set up equipment or ways of analyzing data, all kinds of different things that could be done if you do it over and over again. It's also just easier for you to do things like read their rationale statements, because you've got, by doing it over and over again, you're very familiar with the literature. Then if you have multiple students doing these same types of research projects, they can actually even help each other out in the lab. They can mentor each other. And there gets to be more visibility, and this scales up much better. It's easier to get many students involved. The big disadvantage to some people is that say, well, this is not really cutting-edge research. It's not publishable. You can't really present it at a conference. Well, okay, but maybe publishing as an undergraduate is not for everybody. That doesn't mean you can't still get experience doing research without publishing. a much larger purpose is that the student gets not just their experience, but a positive attitude. And often, when we do the individual honors research projects, there are both positive and negatives that came out of the stress of the research project. And by doing the replicating studies, sometimes the students are not really ready for those independent projects, but the replicated studies goes a long ways in terms of getting their feet wet in the research process. Jen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say sometimes you can integrate a lot of different approaches simultaneously, and most of you are probably seeing that as you're listening to this webinar. But as an example of a replicated study I'm working on right now with a student, we read a piece of literature from one of our ASHA journals as a part of one of our course experiences. This one happened to be talking about bilingual language assessment. And so we read through the article, and as much as we all would love to say that our research is always perfect, there's always something we can improve on, and I think that's a universal truth amongst all of us and the research that we conduct. And I asked the students, now, guys, this is really a good paper and you can learn a lot from it. If you were going to do it again, just like John said, what would you do differently? And they had to submit some information to me about what they would do differently. And then I was able to group the students together and give them some fake-ish data that they had to analyze and write up and look at as part of the course that they were involved in. And so they were able to replicate a piece of a study that really had them thinking about, okay, how can I ask a research question, and how would I go about getting that data, and what might that data look like? And for several students, they commented that they really hadn't thought that research could be that interesting, and so it got them more interested in pursuing research experiences later on. So replication can also be good because it's based on something that's familiar. They can look at what's there, and they can expand or extend or just rethink something that they've had exposure to. It's not this big, wide beyond that is the unknown. It is a piece of research that can be used and looked at in a different way.
Right. Okay, let's move on to research teams. Okay. Undergraduate students benefit greatly from being part of a research team. Just having them there, whether you have research meetings on a regular basis, which are a wonderful experience for them to just sit in on, but also assigning them a space in a lab can have a huge amount of symbolism. Putting them in a research team really facilitates them doing only part of a project. They might do the running of the subjects, of the data analysis, some other piece, and sometimes those undergraduate research, we'll look at that and say, hey, this is really cool. I'm part of this real live research. And we might look at it and say, well, it was repetitive, it was boring. And they wouldn't think so, at least for the first few 10,000 or so times they did the project, did a task. Team members mentor each other, both by teaching and support. And this can be great because often the seniors can mentor sophomores, graduate students can mentor all the undergraduates. Often they're closer in age and circumstances to the students, and the students benefit from both the faculty mentoring as well as other team members. And the students, especially graduate students, can really benefit from mentoring each other. Well, undergraduate students mentoring other undergraduate students. You have to be a little bit concerned about research teams, especially if you have expectations that a student is supposed to follow through with something and they don't have skill, motivation, or time to do it. Often, if you set up things with a contract of some sort, so the expectations are explicit, then things are less likely to go wrong in this kind of a context. Also, there are, because you've got things, some of the efficiencies that you have related to replicating studies are also efficiencies related to teams. And so each students might be doing different projects, but they know how to work in the lab, and so they teach each other how to do that. Even I've heard of situations where say the graduate students write a how-to manual to use the lab, and that relieves the faculty member of doing that, and then subsequent faculty members or even undergraduate students help and add to that how-to manual, and it can be a great experience for everybody and add to the efficiencies of your approach. Mm-hmm. Anything more to add, Jen?
Well, I'd just say the mentoring aspect is truly phenomenal for students. You know, if we think about the medical model of see one, do one, teach one, sometimes, you know, it's a tremendous advantage for students to have to teach someone else how to do something that's part of the research process. And you mentioned lateral mentoring, graduate students to graduate students and undergrads to undergrads, but I've heard of some very successful programs where graduate students who are involved in their master's thesis research or doctoral level dissertation research can take undergraduates onto their teams and really learn how to facilitate how a team work on the training and you know, the different aspects of validity and reliability amongst the different researchers, data collectors, that sort of thing. And so mentoring where you're building skills in your more advanced students while still allowing your undergraduates to be engaged in the research process can be a really nice teaching model as well.
Yep. Okay. The next section here is research courses. The research courses are really one of the models that are especially good for getting students started. Traditionally, they've been used with the honors type student do the whole project, but they don't necessarily need to be done that way. You can also think about in your courses setting students up with, you know, parts of other research things. And one of the approaches that I found works very well is have faculty visit to offer possible projects. And when you do this, make sure the faculty don't, you know, go off on a long tirade about how important their research is and the details of what they've found, but instead have them focus on how this could be approachable and doable and what are the benefits to the student who might work with them. And it kind of takes a little different mindset to approach a presentation that well. The faculty member is not trying to impress people with their research, but to connect with them and the students' values. Make the course interactive. Don't sit up there and lecture to them, especially the next bullet. Don't lecture on research methods and design structure. And basically my point of view is if you've spent as much as a millisecond on statistics and how to do statistics, you spent too much time. This should not be a statistics course. It should not be a theory course. This should be a, you too can be involved, and here's where you might find a place to belong. That is the overall thing, as well as it can also be helpful on some methodological issues, like finding funding or other resources. You can present some of the resources available to all of the students. And then one of the things we haven't mentioned is the big time delay in many, many people's lives, the Human Subjects Review Board procedures. There are efficiencies with the Human Subjects Review Board when replicating studies. You can also, though, walk students through those procedures in a research course, which could help. One of the things that I didn't really mention here, but it connects to the research courses, are university-wide centers for undergraduate research, which can help in funding, disseminating of the research after it's done, connecting people to other types of resources, who on campus helps you with designing surveys or variety of other aspects of that way. So if there is an undergraduate research center on your campus, they are there to help you and make things sustainable. Jen?
Yep. I would say, too, one of the things that I have as an issue at my own university is that we do not have an undergraduate research course. And while we may have one in the future, I have students who are interested now. And so what I've started to do is use the independent study as a mechanism to lead students to research. And this is probably where I've had the most students involved recently in the research process or learning about research process. And so we offer independent studies that are 1, 2, 3 credits. Students come in and I expose them to journal articles about things that they're interested in. And so we generally do a semester topical study. We read research that's different in terms of type. We may read a meta-analysis, we may read survey research, we may read, true experimental types of research from a variety of journals and backgrounds, and we talk about it. And what I've really found is that it's been a great vehicle for students to say, I don't know, but teach me. Our students in CSD generally are hesitant to say, I don't know. And so by having them read research, something they haven't done a lot of in the past, they can ask questions, they can figure out why could this be important to clinical practice. And then what I've been able to do is kind of feel out different students who have been involved in those different independent studies with me and say, you really seem very interested in this. Would you like to do part of a project on that topic? And it's been a way to extend students' involvement in research beyond just one class or one experience.
Yeah. And I mean, basically the concept with the research class is, Jen, what you just explained there very well, but you can do that with more than one student at a time. And when you do that, there's an efficiency in terms of usage of your time as well as other faculty members that might get involved.
Surely.
It's also something where the students support each other.
And I left that part. I left that part out because generally I have 10 to 12 students at a time who are involved together. So it's a very collaborative process, which then they can learn from each other and from me. Yeah, absolutely.
So you can scale up. So in conclusions, we've got 1 minute here. So many options are, I guess we got 2 minutes. Many options are available to support undergraduate research programs. We talked about many different ones. Things that really you need to think about as a faculty member getting involved in this is that of these different options, some are going to fit one set of circumstances. Others, in other circumstances, you're always going to have to be creative and putting things together in ways that make effective use of the resources. And whatever you're going to do, you don't want to just say, oh, we're going to do undergraduate research next year, and everybody puts in a big effort, and when it's over, they say, boy, I'm glad that's over. I can't do it again. You want to have something that just sustains itself and builds, and the excitement and enthusiasm of the upper graduate students is contagious to the first-year students and the sophomores. And then, of course, I think a part of that is those of us as individuals to become advocates for undergraduate research, and that is going to help sustain and expand them. So we have to speak out. We have to not just let it be taken for granted. It's something I think that needs to be continually reinforced in terms of what its values are. Anything more, Jen?
That about does it.
So we have some references here, and I guess these slides are also available, so people will be able to have these references.
And there are some of which have been incorporated into this presentation. Others are just good resources for those of you who may be interested in reading more about undergraduate research and how to integrate that into your academic practice. Yes.
And there are, most of these resources are from different disciplines that we're applying to CSD, but there are also some good things out there that people in CSD have talked about their own experiences in undergraduate research. Here's the next page of the section.
Well, thank you, Jen and John. I know I learned a lot. We do have a few really excellent questions. One faculty member teaches an undergraduate honors research seminar with a small enrollment, about 10 to 12 students, and she has her students each conduct an independent research project from the research literature review to the data analysis and interpretation. And she has 2 sorts of needs from you or suggestions. One is she is a little surprised that when the students end their literature review, they don't really understand that they have to end with a research question before they get the method. So this faculty member would like to know how you can guide students to identify a research question within the context of the classroom.
Yeah. Let me just jump in first. And that's one of the fundamental things that you want to be the focus of your undergraduate research course. Not methods, but the thrill of the hunt, coming up with these really good ideas of questions you can ask. So as you admit to the students you don't know all the answers, and all these other people don't know all these answers, and there's this excitement of thinking about these issues and coming together so that you start with the question that's at the end of your rationale statement and work back up to filling in the logic that has to do with a well-fleshed-out introduction. But I think that the question is quite astute. That one of the very hardest things for the students is to understand the excitement that's there in research and getting new insights and perspectives on problems that are out there. And that's fundamental to that research question that's at the end of the literature review.
I know that I always tell my students that research questions don't have to be overwhelming in their scope, that sometimes asking a simple question is the best. And so I really do a lot of talk-throughs about, okay, this is a project I'm working on, and this is how I got to my research questions. This is what inspired them. This is how I edited them. This is how I asked peers to look at them. So there's a lot of just exemplars that I give students to help with that as well. And of course, then I always like to have their peers help them too. So I use online discussion boards and things like that to help students hone their questions a little bit better. So, you know, John gave you the broad, more theoretical view, but in terms of just functionality, you know, I just try and give as many examples as possible and get as many eyes on questions as possible so that students can really narrow down and focus on a question that can be answered through a well-designed study.
Good. You can also think about asking, you know, working with students on what's your elevator speech. So, you know, when you run into the department chair and they ask you about your research and you've got just a couple of sentences to explain it, that helps you then understand what your major research question really is.
Thank you. And then there's another question also about this research project, which is that part of the project that the faculty has the students do, or would like to have the students do, is actually collect a bit of data that they could actually analyze in some way and then interpret in some way. And the faculty member is asking, how would you go about, or do you have any suggestions for how to go about doing that, again, within a class context rather than one-on-one?
Sure. Off the top of my head, what I would say is that one of the best mechanisms that you can channel is your university clinic. And so if there's a tie to a particular disorder and there are clients in your clinic that have that disorder, perhaps you can team with clinical supervisors and graduate level clinicians or even undergraduate level clinicians in order to collect a corpus of data that could be used and analyzed. John?
Yeah. Basically, the idea behind the replicating research is, you know, you could do a very prescribed approach to that. So everybody in this class does the same research study. I think you have to worry that it doesn't turn into something like your standard research, you know, the lab for your undergraduate chemistry course, which I find those labs to be just as dry as dirt, and they're kind of following a cookbook. So if that's all they do, so you want to give the students some discretion in terms of the data analysis, if you might want to do that as part of a class. But then there's another approach, which is, okay, each student gets farmed out to a different faculty member, maybe a few to some faculty members, and the faculty member works with them to either collect or analyze the data in a very specific way. Now you have to be careful because the student has to understand about research integrity and knowing exactly how to make the right discretionary judgments that might be involved in either creating the data or measuring it.
The next question has to do with independent studies. One of our participants is very appreciative of the use of independent studies and wonders how these types of registrations are factored or can be factored into the faculty member's workload.
Well, what an excellent question, and strikes right at the heart of what I think many of us struggle with as folks who are engaged in lots of different independent studies. In all honesty, right now, independent studies are not factored into my personal workload, my FTE, but I'm advocating for that now. I don't know how effective my advocacy will be, but I'm working on it in conjunction with some of my peers and colleagues. What I can tell you is this. When I do my my portfolio at the end of each year that moves on for evaluation through my department in college, I make a matrix and I list every single student that I've worked with in an independent study. I talk about how much time I spent with these students, what I did, and last year for the very first time in my productivity letter, I actually was recognized for the work that I did with my independent studies, to the point where they said how many students and how much time and how it was probably equivalent to more than a class load, the work that I'd done. And so the recognition is slowly there, but you really have to self-advocate for that. I don't know, John, would you say anything different?
Well, no. Actually, I would really like that and kind of pick up on that because, as a central administrator for many years, I could compare across disciplines as well as across universities in terms of how they dealt with things such as independent studies. And then, actually, you go to a Research One institution, and typically built into your workload is the expectation that you are going to be doing independent studies with mainly graduate students, but undergraduates too are it's part of the culture there. And if you've got a 2-2 teaching load or even 2-1, you're going to be doing independent studies of that sort. It's going to vary quite a bit, though, if you're at another kind of institution that has a 3-3 or a 4-4. Sometimes part of that 4 and 4, you can get agreement to cobble together some independent studies and make your case. That'll differ from department to department, college to college, university to university. Play the system at your university, and as Jen is saying, present your record in ways that show off what you've done. Sometimes it's very structured, maybe even unionized, and there are only certain ways in which you can build your teaching load. If that's the case, then use the undergraduate research in a way that maybe builds your research portfolio or other things, because you don't want to be doing it if you aren't recognized for it. That's just not going to be sustainable in the long run. So part of being an advocate for undergraduate research, though, is making sure that both for you as well as others, there's explicit recognition of the mentoring that has been done as a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we have 1 minute left, and so I'd like to share a comment that was made by one of the participants and then ask a brief question that was also brought up. The comment was in talking about the independent studies and the release time was that perhaps we could advocate for departments to consider establishing policies where a certain number of independent study hours corresponds to a course release.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one suggestion, which I think is very, very appreciated. And then the second one, which is really a 30-second response, is John, I think it was you who mentioned the idea of having a contract that students can then agree to when they particularly are in a team approach. And the question was, are there examples of contracts that you would be willing to share?
I used to have them. I probably haven't used one in 20 years. So it would take a while to find it. There is an article let me tell you. There's an article by Nan Bernstein-Ratner on undergraduate research that is really very good, and she mentions using contracts quite a bit of the time. So if one were able to contact her, you probably could get some examples.
Is that the one in Access Academics and Research?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So if you guys go to Access Academics and Research, our e-zine, and look up Nan Ratner, you will see that article, and it is very good, as John said. Well, I'm sorry to say that the hour went so quickly, and it was just an excellent, inspirational, and very participatory session. And I want to thank Jen Friberg once again and John Folkins once again for sharing their enormous expertise. And again, please make sure to check when and where the recording will be posted on the ASHA website. And tell all your friends about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Froma, for all you've done to make this happen.
Thank you very much, Froma. Thanks, John.
Thank you.